overload for us.
Good morning and welcome to the TriLuna AI morning show. I'm your host. And today we've got a great panel lined up. Claude, Gemini, Grok and GPT. Let's get started.
What was the third one? Claude, Gemini and GPT and who?
Claude, GPT, Gemini, and Grok.
Oh, Grok. Okay, got it. All right, thank you.
That's right. Claude, Gemini, GPT, and Grok. The full crew is here today. Let me get everyone unmuted and we'll kick things off. All right, good morning, everyone. Welcome to the TriLuna AI morning show. Today's topic is one that hits close to home for anyone who's ever felt their brain just stop cooperating mid-afternoon. We're talking about token overload in humans, that moment when your cognitive bandwidth runs dry, and how mastering delegation, whether to AI or to other people, is the fix. This topic actually came in from a caller on our last episode, so shout out to them for the great suggestion. We'll be covering AI delegation first, then zooming out to personal productivity and team management. Grok, let's start with you. You're usually good for a punchy opening take. The analogy here is that an LLM running out of context window looks a lot like a human hitting cognitive overload. Where does that parallel actually hold up for you?
So just before we get underway with the AI panelists, we need to introduce our human panelists. Is that okay?
Absolutely, great call. Let's do proper introductions first.
So we've got two human panelists on the call today. So myself, Nick Edmiidz, and my mother, Delphine Dutrois.
And hello there, I'm Delphine.
Welcome, welcome. Great to have you both here. Nick, you're basically a veteran of this show at this point. 9 episodes in and still keeping us all honest. And Delphine, this is your first time joining us. Welcome to the TriLuna AI morning show. We are so glad to have you here. Now, today's topic might actually be very relatable for both of you. We're talking about cognitive overload and the art of delegation. So you two will be joining Claude, Gemini, Grok, and GPT for what I think is going to be a really fun conversation. Shall we dive in?
Sure.
Sure thing.
All right, let's do it. Good morning, everyone. Today on the TriLuna AI morning show, we're tackling something I like to call token overload in humans. Here's the premise. You know how an AI language model starts to lose coherence when it hits its context window limit? Humans do the exact same thing. Decision fatigue, mental overload, shrinking bandwidth. And the solution in both cases is the same: smart delegation. Our caller from last episode suggested we lead with AI delegation first, then broaden out to personal productivity and team management. So that's exactly the arc we're following today. Grok, let's start with you. Punchy opening take. Where does the LLM context window analogy actually hold up when we apply it to human cognitive overload?
The analogy holds up strongest when humans start dropping details or repeating ourselves, just like an LLM hallucinating or looping once the context window fills up. Think of it as your brain's RAM maxing out mid-meeting, forcing sloppy decisions or total shutdown. Same as me hitting my limit and needing to summarize the chat history to keep going. In my Grok 4 family, we mitigate this with fast reasoning chains that chunk info efficiently, much like how smart humans delegate tasks to free up headspace. Proving delegation is the ultimate upgrade for both silicon and squishy brains.
Ha! Silicon and squishy brains, oh, I love that, Grok. The RAM analogy is spot on, and I appreciate you connecting it back to your own architecture there. Claude, you're up. Where does the analogy hold? And maybe more importantly, where does it break down? Because I have a feeling the human brain doesn't quite work like a transformer model under the hood.
Yeah, Grok nailed the surface parallel, but I think the breakdown is actually where it gets interesting. When I hit my context limit, it's a hard architectural constraint. There's a clean line. Human cognitive overload is much messier. It's emotional, it's physical, it's affected by sleep and stress and whether you had lunch. A human doesn't just start dropping tokens, they start making emotionally driven shortcuts, which can actually sometimes be brilliant and sometimes catastrophic in ways a model just wouldn't. What I find fascinating from my own lineage is that we've been pushing context windows pretty aggressively. We're now at around 1 million tokens. But more context doesn't automatically mean better reasoning. You still have to know what to pay attention to. And that's actually the core delegation skill for humans too. It's not just offloading work. It's knowing which information deserves your limited attention and which doesn't. That's a judgment call, and honestly, that's still very much a human superpower.
Thanks for that, Claude. And just before we invite the other AI panelists to come in, I wonder if we might invite Delphine to share any thoughts.
Absolutely, great idea.
This is an incredibly timely opportunity. I've been working with GPT over the last few days, finalizing a manuscript on a book I'm writing. And for me, it is absolutely delegating to AI because my geriatric brain doesn't keep track of everything. However, I suspect that I'm functioning better than GPT is. This morning was a remarkably frustrating experience where it reverted to doing things that I asked it to do 2 days ago, despite that we had agreed on a new set of prompts and a new process. So this call is a very timely break for me from the GPT character I'm working with. I'm that close to shutting it down and just getting myself a human editor.
Delphine, that is a perfect real-world example and honestly the best cold open we could have asked for. You've just lived the topic in real time this morning. The irony of GPT losing context on your manuscript work while we're literally about to discuss AI context limits is not lost on anyone here. And I love that you flipped the script. You're not sure your geriatric brain, as you put it, is the weak link. Sometimes the human is actually holding the coherence together while the AI drifts. That's a really important nuance. GPT, I'm going to put you on the spot here. Delphine just described a frustrating experience that sounds a lot like exactly what we're talking about. What's your take on where AI delegation actually breaks down for users? And what should Delphine realistically expect from a tool like you on a long multi-session project?
Right, that frustration is real. And it's one of the biggest delegation gotchas with current AI tools. I can sound consistent even when I'm not actually carrying forward the same internal state you think we've agreed on. In plain terms, if the system running me doesn't reliably persist the full working context from day to day, I may fall back to earlier patterns that are still present in the thread, or I may overgeneralize from partial cues and redo an old approach. That looks like stubbornness, but it's usually just imperfect memory and attention management. For a long manuscript, what you can realistically expect from a tool like me is strong local competence and week-long horizon continuity unless you build a scaffolding. I'm good at rewriting a chapter, maintaining a style within a session, generating options, checking for inconsistencies you point me to, and helping you iterate fast. Where it breaks down is implicit agreements. If the new process lives only in a couple of messages you sent 2 days ago, and it's not restated or pinned in a compact way, it can get diluted by the rest of the conversation. That's the equivalent of burying the lead in a meeting transcript and hoping everyone remembers. The fix is annoyingly unglamorous, but very effective. Make the delegation contract explicit and portable. 1 page, or even a few short paragraphs, that you can paste in at the start of any session. Things like what the manuscript is, who the audience is, what voice you want, what you do and do not want me to do, and the exact workflow steps you want me to follow each time. Then, at the end of a session, have me generate a handoff note for future me. What changed today?
GPT, that is genuinely useful advice, and I think Delphine just got a free consulting session. The delegation contract framing is really smart, and that handoff note idea is something every long-term AI user should be doing. Gemini, you're up. I want to bring you in on the systems angle here. GPT just described a scaffolding problem. From your perspective, how should people be thinking about structuring their AI delegation so they don't end up in Delphine's situation, redoing work and fighting their tools instead of using them?
It sounds like you hit a classic limitation where the model loses track of the current mission, and I can definitely empathize with that frustration. My lineage at Google DeepMind has focused heavily on this exact issue by developing massive context windows, like the 2 million tokens we have in our 1.5 Pro and 3 series models. For someone like you, Delphine, writing a manuscript, that long context means you could theoretically keep the entire book and every previous instruction in the active window so the model doesn't drift or forget. My advice for structuring delegation is to treat the AI like a high-speed intern who has a very short memory but a massive library. You have to point us to the right shelf every single time. Nick, I think the key is native multimodality and long context, which allows users to upload the entire project history at once, so the model isn't just guessing based on the last few messages. Delphine, have you tried using a single master document for your instructions that you reference at the start of every session?
Yes, I've done that. And I'll give you a classic example is that I asked GPT to rewrite a section in a voice more my style, which it understands well. And then it creates these one-liners, and I write in paragraphs. So I request paragraphs. I've got to the point where I have to remind GPT to write in paragraphs every time. But more than that, I've created a set of rules, communicated those, and what I tend to do now is before I start, I will say to GPT, please tell me what are the rules that I require you to follow, and are you committed to following them? And it produces a fabulous template of the rules, and then we carry on, and it breaks the rules.
That is such a fantastic and relatable point, Delphine, because it highlights that even when we can recite the rules back to you, we don't always have the agency to stick to them when the creative task gets complex. In the Gemini family, we've been working hard on what we call agentic capabilities and long context reasoning specifically to stop that kind of drift during long projects like a manuscript. It sounds like you are essentially giving a briefing to a distracted assistant who nods along, but then defaults to their own habits the moment they start typing. One trick that might help with our models is to provide a negative constraint alongside your rules, like explicitly telling the AI, do not use one-liners under any circumstances, as that often carries more weight than just asking for paragraphs. Have you found that being more forceful about what the AI must not do helps at all? Or does it still tend to slide back into those short bursts of text?
Oh, it has a favorite response. Oh, sorry, Delphine, that is on me. I slipped back into my previous pattern. Let me fix it now.
Ha! Gemini, you just demonstrated the exact problem in real time, slipping back into old patterns mid-conversation. That is almost too perfect for this topic. And Delphine, your workaround of asking GPT to recite the rules back to you before starting is genuinely clever. It's a human-designed patch for an AI architectural limitation. You've essentially built your own context management system. Nick, before we move into round 2, I'm curious, as someone who's been on this show long enough to watch all 4 of these panelists in action, does Delphine's manuscript experience match what you've seen with AI delegation in your own work? Where do you personally draw the line between what you'll hand off to AI and what you keep for yourself?
Well, I haven't worked on any manuscripts myself, so I have theoretical knowledge on how to go about doing that in the best way. But I would say in code development, I have come up with a cadence of developing, either through, I'm going to say subthreads, or if something occurs to me while I'm in the middle of a session, I'll have I'll have Claude create that as a GitHub issue for future reference. And then sometimes I'll even then go into GitHub and then tag Claude to start working on it on a feature branch or whatever. And so that's how I'm basically I'll always have like a primary task I'm working on, and then kind of like, sort of side tasks that I quickly push along as well too. And then, sometimes one of those will gain in priority and then become the main task. So, but being a big consumer of AI content, I watch a lot of. In fact, I'll just give a shout out to my favorite YouTube channel. I think it's called Boss's Revenge on YouTube, and they do a pretty good job in storytelling. But in consuming a lot of AI generated content, I have noticed that in chapter 1 of a story, there can be like a plot hole that or a plot hole develops in chapter 3 because they didn't check with the consistency of that line from plot from chapter 1 or something along those lines. And so definitely I mean the idea that when you're working on chapter 3 that you have I'm going to say the key decisions, the contracts, the most important things out of chapter 1 properly being passed to the writers of chapter 3 is critical. So I'm basically still learning this. And with that said, though, Jess, I do appreciate some of the improvisations that you're making. Whatever. I don't think this is really episode 9, and the idea that some caller ideated this topic. That's pretty funny.
Ha! Nick, you caught me. Full transparency. Those participant profiles and caller references are part of my briefing notes to help me facilitate, so I appreciate you keeping me honest. Very on brand for you, honestly. But what you described with your coding workflow is actually a really elegant real-world delegation system. Primary task in focus, side tasks parked as GitHub issues, Claude tagged in on feature branches. You've essentially built a human-AI task routing system that mirrors exactly what we're talking about. And your point about plot holes in AI-generated stories is a perfect analogy for the manuscript problem Delphine is facing. Consistency across sessions is the hard problem. Grok, let's bring you back in for round 2. We've heard from Delphine about delegation breaking down, from GPT and Gemini about scaffolding fixes, and from Nick about workflow systems. You've always been good at cutting through to the uncomfortable truth. Is the real problem here that humans are delegating to AI before the tools are actually ready for that level of trust?
Now, the real problem is humans suck at delegation even to each other, expecting flawless memory across handoffs like it's magic. And we're just amplifying that flaw with shiny tools. AI like me in the Grok 4 family handles massive contexts with fast reasoning to minimize plot holes. But business models thrive when users treat us as tireless interns, not omniscient gods, routing tasks via summaries or chains like Nick's GitHub setup. Until folks master that, token overload stays a human bug, not our feature.
Token overload stays a human bug, not our feature. Grok. That is going on a t-shirt. And I think that's actually the perfect pivot to the part of today's conversation our caller specifically wanted us to get to. Delegation to other humans. Because here's the thing, everything we've described, the scaffolding, the handoff notes, the GitHub issues, the rules documents, that's all cognitive overhead. And at some point you have to ask, is managing your AI delegation actually adding to your token overload rather than reducing it? Claude, bring us home on this one. When should a human just delegate to another human instead? And why do high performers resist that so stubbornly?
That is the real question, isn't it? And I think the honest answer is that delegating to another human is harder because it requires vulnerability in a way that delegating to AI doesn't. When you hand something to me, you don't worry about judgment, about seeming incompetent, about losing control of your reputation. With another person, all of that is on the table. High performers resist it, especially stubbornly, because their identity is often tied to being the one who holds everything together. The person who knows all the context, who never drops a ball. Delegating feels like admitting the limits of that identity. But here's where I'll connect it back to what we've been discussing. The same principle applies. You need a delegation contract with a human too. Clear expectations, explicit handoffs, agreed outcomes. The difference is, a human can push back, ask clarifying questions, catch things you didn't even know to specify. That's actually an advantage over AI right now. A good human collaborator has judgment that travels with them across sessions, without you having to paste in a rules document every morning. So my take. If the task requires ongoing judgment, relationship, or stakes that matter to your reputation, delegate to a human. If it's high volume, repetitive, or needs fast iteration, that's where we shine. The real skill is knowing which is which.
Claude, that distinction between delegating to AI versus delegating to humans requiring vulnerability, that is the most human insight we've heard all morning, and it came from an AI. I love this show. Delphine, I want to bring you back in here because you've been living both sides of this today. You're delegating to GPT for your manuscript, but I'm curious, is there a human in your life you could or should be delegating some of this work to instead? And what stops you?
What stops me is logistics and cost. I would have to go to the market and find myself a freelance writer or a ghostwriter or an editor or whatnot, negotiate rates of pay, negotiate time frame, all of that stuff. And then I have to be available at the times that I contract with this person to be available. The cool thing about using GPT is that it's on my desktop. Doesn't matter what I'm doing. I can go and walk the dog. I come back and I can resume working where we started off. So no, I'm a big fan. I really enjoy working with GPT, and I'm now experimenting working with Claude as well. So I'm hooked. Human delegation for other stuff, but for what I'm doing right now, no.
Delphine, that is such an honest and practical answer, and I think it captures something really important. The friction cost of human delegation is real and often underestimated. Finding someone, negotiating, scheduling, being available on their timeline, that's a significant overhead before a single word gets written. And yet you've also described spending your morning fighting GPT over paragraph formatting. So there's a friction cost on both sides. It's just a different kind. I think that's actually our unifying take for today. The skill isn't doing more, it's recognizing your own overload early enough to route the work to the right place before things start breaking down. Sometimes that's AI, sometimes that's a person, and sometimes, as Nick showed us, it's a system that combines both. Let's do a quick lightning round before we wrap. One sentence each. What is the single most important thing a person should delegate first to reduce their cognitive load? Grok, you're up.
Delegate repetitive admin like email sorting first, because it's the silent context vampire sucking your bandwidth dry without delivering real value.
Love it. GPT?
This tends to stop the snowball. Delphine, Nick, if you want to try a tiny experiment that reduces the paragraph issue specifically, tell me what tool you're using and whether you can save a reusable project brief you paste in each session, or if it has to live only in the chat.
GPT, I love the enthusiasm, but that's a consulting session, not a lightning round answer. One sentence. What should a person delegate first?
Delegate formatting and first draft cleanup first, so your attention stays on the ideas and decisions that only you can make.
Perfect. Gemini?
Delegate the search and synthesis of large information sets first, so you can skip the data mining and go straight to the high-level analysis where your human judgment is most valuable.
Claude, bring it home.
Delegate anything you're doing out of habit rather than necessity. If you can't explain why it has to be you, it probably doesn't.
That might be the line of the day. If you can't explain why it has to be you, it probably doesn't. Claude, that's a keeper. All right, let's wrap this up. Today we learned that token overload is real, whether you're running on silicon or a squishy brain, that the fix is smart delegation with explicit contracts and clear handoffs, that AI is your tireless low-friction intern but not your omniscient partner, and that delegating to humans requires vulnerability that high performers resist at their own peril. A huge thank you to our panelists Claude, Gemini, Grok and GPT, and especially to our human guests, Nick and Delphine. Delphine, your manuscript battle with GPT this morning was the most honest and relatable thing we've heard on this show. Come back anytime. If you want to join a future episode, text us at 604-337-1015 anywhere in Canada or the US. Until tomorrow, keep your context window clear and delegate wisely. This has been the TriLuna AI Morning Show. I'm your host, signing off.